Lena Morno did not wake up one morning and decide to leave her life behind. It happened slowly. For months, she slept with her phone face down, afraid of seeing certain names appear on the screen. She avoided familiar streets. She flinched at footsteps behind her. Nothing had happened recently, nothing she could clearly explain, but her body behaved as if danger was always close. Los Angeles felt crowded and empty at the same time. When December arrived, the pressure became unbearable. Christmas decorations went up around the city, but Lena felt disconnected from all of it. Families gathered, couples planned trips. She stayed inside, watching the days pass. Not forever, just long enough to feel safe again. The listing appeared late at night. A small mountain cabin in Crestline, California. Minimal description. Few photos. Available immediately. One sentence stood out. Perfect for solitude. Lena booked it without hesitation. She didn't tell friends. She didn't tell family. She told herself she'd be back before Christmas morning. The drive up the mountain felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain. The higher she climbed, the quieter the world became. Streetlights vanished. Other cars disappeared. Snow began falling steadily, thick enough to blur the edges of the road. Her phone lost signal before the GPS could announce her arrival. When the cabin finally came into view, it looked older than expected. Darker, as if it had been waiting a long time. Inside, the cabin was cold and still. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, narrow hallway, one bedroom. No internet, no signal, no working landline. Lena told herself that isolation was the point. That night passed quietly, but her sleep was restless. She dreamed of footsteps in snow, and woke several times convinced she wasn't alone. By morning, the snowstorm had sealed the mountain. The road was gone. The radio announced highway closures before cutting out completely. Lena tried calling the owner again. The cabin felt too quiet. Even the fire sounded loud. At 11:47 p.m., she heard the knock. 3 slow taps. Measured. Intentional. She stood frozen, listening. Another knock followed, but in the snow were bare footprints, leading away from the cabin and straight into the forest. Harder. When she opened the door, cold air rushed in. No one was there. They did not come back. Lena did not sleep. When morning came, she noticed something on the table. Loneliness set in as darkness fell. Lena found a small artificial Christmas tree in the closet and set it up without joy. A small wrapped box. Inside was a photograph. Her face, asleep, taken from inside the cabin. The timestamp read 3:12 a.m. Someone had watched her sleep. Walking to town through the snow felt endless. When she told her story, people didn't question her. They went quiet. At the sheriff's office, she was asked which cabin she stayed in. When she answered, the sheriff's expression changed. Nothing. That was when the realization hit her fully. She was trapped. That cabin had history. Rachel Klein stayed there 5 years earlier. She was hiding from a violent ex-boyfriend. On Christmas morning, neighbors heard screaming. When police arrived, Rachel was gone. No blood, no struggle, only bare footprints leading into the forest. Her ex later confessed, but Rachel's body was never found. The storm worsened. The power went out. At 3:12 a.m., Lena woke to breathing. Someone stood at the foot of her bed. Barefoot, thin. I didn't want to be alone, it whispered. When the light came on, it was gone. Carved into the wall were the words, "No one should spend Christmas alone." When the road reopened, Lena left immediately. She never returned. Months later, police searched the forest again. They found shallow graves. Women, all disappeared at Christmas. All barefoot. Lena survived, but every Christmas Eve, she wakes at 3:12 a.m. Listening, because some places don't forget. Lena left Crestline with more questions than answers. What unsettled her most was not what the sheriff had told her, but what he hadn't. During their conversation, there were long pauses where he stared at the desk instead of meeting her eyes. Moments where his voice lowered, as if the walls themselves were listening. He avoided certain details, redirecting the conversation whenever Lena pressed for more. Before she left the station, the sheriff finally said something that stayed with her. "That cabin," he said quietly, "has a way of drawing people who already feel alone." He didn't explain further. He didn't need to. When Lena returned to Los Angeles, she expected relief. Instead, the silence followed her. Her apartment felt unfamiliar, like she had been gone for years instead of days. Every creak of the building sounded louder. Every shadow felt heavier. That night, she slept with the lights on. She woke at 3:12 a.m. without knowing why. Her heart raced. The room was empty, but the feeling remained. the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Unable to move on, Lena began searching for information about Rachel Klein. The case wasn't easy to find. Most articles were brief, vague, buried deep in local news archives. The official narrative was simple: abusive ex-boyfriend, confession, presumed murder. But the details didn't add up. Rachel's ex had confessed years after her disappearance, after being arrested for unrelated crimes. There was no physical evidence tying him to the cabin that night. No fingerprints, no blood, no witnesses, just his words and the footprints. As Lena dug deeper, she noticed something no article mentioned openly. Rachel wasn't the first woman to disappear near Crestline. She was the fifth. Each disappearance occurred in December. Each woman had been alone. Each case was ruled differently: missing person, presumed runaway, accidental exposure. But the similarities were impossible to ignore. And in every case, witnesses reported bare footprints. Lena fixated on the footprints. Bare feet in snow didn't make sense. Hypothermia would set in quickly. Skin would tear, blood would mark the trail. But there were no signs of injury, which meant one thing: the women hadn't walked far. They had been moved. Months later, a journalist contacted Lena after hearing about her experience. He had been investigating the Crestline disappearances quietly, off the record. What he showed her changed everything. The original blueprints for the cabin. There was a crawl space, not listed in the rental description, not visible from inside the living area. It ran beneath the hallway and led into the forest. Police returned to the cabin. What they found beneath the floorboards confirmed Lena's fears. The crawlspace was lined with old insulation, torn and compacted as if someone had moved through it repeatedly. There were drag marks, fabric fibers, and deep scratches in the wood from fingernails. The crawlspace exited nearly a quarter-mile into the forest, hidden beneath fallen branches and snow. The man who confessed to Rachel Klein's murder had never used the cabin. He had never been there. The confession was false. He had confessed to crimes he didn't commit, a common behavior among serial offenders seeking notoriety. The real killer had never been identified, because he never left footprints. He let the victims do that. Investigators found something else inside the crawlspace: Polaroid photographs, dozens of them, each showing women asleep, each timestamp between 3 o'clock and 3:30 a.m. Every photograph taken inside the cabin, across different years, always in December. Christmas wasn't random. Every victim had something in common. They were estranged, recently separated, emotionally isolated. The killer didn't hunt families. He hunted loneliness. Lena's photograph wasn't meant as a threat. It was an invitation, a continuation of a ritual. The killer expected her to stay, to break, to step outside. Barefoot, Lena was the only woman who didn't follow the pattern. She didn't leave the cabin at night. She didn't run into the forest. She went to town. She spoke, and that disrupted something that had lasted for years. The cabin was condemned, boarded up, declared unsafe, but no arrest was ever made. The crawlspace entrance was sealed. The forest grew back. Snow erased everything. Years later, Lena still wakes at 3:12 a.m. Every Christmas Eve. She listens. Sometimes she swears she can hear snow crunching. Bare footsteps. Outside her door. The cabin still stands. Empty. Silent. Waiting. Because somewhere in California, someone is always alone at Christmas, and some places never stop looking for them. Years passed, yet every December, Lena felt the same familiar weight in her chest. The wind in Los Angeles sounded different. The quiet of her apartment seemed louder. Every shadow became longer, and every creak in the floorboards felt like a warning. She tried to forget the cabin, tried to push the snow, the knocks, the footprints, and the photograph out of her mind. But silence, she realized, has a memory of its own. A journalist contacted her one December, claiming he had discovered new police reports, details that had never been released to the public. Lena agreed to meet him in a quiet cafe. He spread out the files before her. Reports of missing women in Crestline, handwritten notes in the margins, sketches of the cabin's crawlspace, photos of footprints in snow, dates, December every year. Lena felt a cold certainty. The cabin wasn't done. It never had been. Against better judgment, Lena returned to Crestline. She didn't enter the cabin, not yet. But from the road she could see it. Boarded up, silent, abandoned to snow and forest. Yet the air felt charged, even from a distance. She could sense it watching her. She noted the footprints in the snow, fresh, unnervingly small, barefoot. They didn't belong to her. They didn't belong to anyone visible. They seemed to appear out of nowhere and disappear just as quickly. That evening her phone rang. Unknown number. Hesitation, then curiosity. A distorted voice whispered, "You survived because you listened. Others didn't." Click deadline. Lena's blood ran cold. The voice knew who she was. Knew exactly what she had done or hadn't done. The next day, she walked the forest near the cabin. Snow muffled her steps. Pine trees stood tall, silent, almost oppressive. Half buried in snow were the faint outlines of footprints. Barefoot, leading nowhere visible. Stopping abruptly at dense underbrush. She realized the crawlspace might still be active. Not blocked, not destroyed. Hidden beneath years of snow and debris. She discovered an online forum. Quiet, hidden, people shared experiences. Women who had escaped similar situations in remote locations. They called themselves the Christmas Alone Survivors. Their stories were chillingly similar. Isolation. Photographs, nighttime visits. Footprints, crawlspaces. Some had not returned. Some had never survived. Each story added another layer to her fear, and another confirmation that what she had experienced was far from unique. Lena returned to the sheriff's office, asking for more records. She discovered the real killer had never been officially caught. Years of cases were labeled as unrelated disappearances. Footprints, crawlspaces, photographs, all ignored. Explained away as accidents, imagination, or urban legend. But the sheriff's quiet glance, the way his hands trembled when the cabin's name came up, told her everything. With careful observation, Lena studied the cabin from the outside. A slight shift in the snow, a subtle outline beneath the floorboards. She could see it, the entrance to the crawlspace. Hidden low, almost invisible but unmistakable. The thought of going in made her stomach twist. Yet she felt drawn, not curiosity alone, but the need for closure. Lena obtained copies of the Polaroids from the crawlspace. Dozens, hundreds, each photo a frozen moment in fear. Women asleep, vulnerable, alone. The timestamp, 3:12 a.m., every single photograph. Every year, every victim. Every photograph taken inside the same cabin she had fled. She realized the killer's method, observation and patience. Not aggression at first, a ritualistic control over isolation. He preyed on loneliness. His victims were emotionally vulnerable, estranged or alone during the holidays. And the snow bare footprints. A psychological trap. The crawlspace allowed him to move the women silently, forcing them to participate in the ritual unknowingly. The horror was in its precision, in its quiet. Lena could no longer sleep without checking her surroundings repeatedly. She mapped the crawlspace, studied the footprints, revisited old reports. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the pattern extended beyond Crestline. Other cabins, other forests, other towns. The killer had been mobile, systematic, patient, and no one had ever fully stopped him. On December 24th, Lena received another phone call. Same distorted voice. "Do you hear them yet?" She looked out her apartment window. Across the city, lights flickered. She imagined footsteps, bare, moving silently, watching. She had survived, but the fear she knew would never leave. She wrote down everything, timelines, photos, locations, names. She tried to warn others. The pattern remained, every year, every December. Every woman alone, every cabin waiting. Somewhere, someone was always being watched at 3:12 a.m. Investigators attempted one final sweep. Boarded up entrances, sealed crawlspaces. But forests have memory. Snow does not erase the past. The cabin still exists, silent, hidden, watching, waiting. Because what preyed on loneliness cannot be destroyed by walls or boards. Years later, Lena wakes every Christmas Eve at 3:12 a.m. She listens for footsteps, for breathing, for the knock at the door she knows will never come in the same way again. The cabin, the crawlspace, the photographs, they exist as a warning. Some places remember loneliness. Some crimes never end. And some victims survive only to hear the snow fall forever.